Okay.
I can't record it without your permission.
Cool. Thank you so much. So before our meeting, I want to introduce our exhibition a little bit more to you. Because like till September, we'll have this art book exhibition featuring photographers like from Southeast Asian countries, also like Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Japan, which we call like the southern places, because like we are in Ningbo, like which is very close to Shanghai, and we are very interested in those like countries and like areas, like how those photographers view their own identities as well as their cultures. And yeah, one of the books that we picked is Romy. I think like you know him, right? Romy's Riders of, Romy's Riders of Destiny, and we're very fascinated by the topic he has chosen, which is like the education of young kids there. So yeah, when I did my research, I also find like you're very involved with that like festival in Indonesia. Like how to pronounce that? Is that Buku Photo Festival?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, because of my research as well as that photo book, I like to know more about like photographic practices in those areas. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the book that Wu Ben did? Zhang Wu Ben? He's based in Singapore. I pulled a couple of books to share today. It's a history of photography in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I read the Chinese version of that book, and he also gave us a kind of like lecture about Southeast Asian like photography. About like its history and also several like contemporary like practices. So maybe we can start with your research project, because like I find that you researched a lot about like Indonesian photography. So I'm wondering like what interests you to do such like research?
I will give you a somewhat long answer to that question. So in 1992, when I was still a university student, I went and lived in Bali for a year. I went to school in Bali and went really to study Balinese Hinduism and Balinese gamelan, the percussion music of Indonesia. And when I finished my education, I spent many years working for an organization in the Western United States in Denver, Colorado, that created opportunities for Indonesian artists in the United States. And at that point, like I was more of a musician than a photographer. I had done a little bit of photography, but that wasn't my primary thing. And I was very interested in maintaining my connection to Indonesia. After doing that for a few years, I taught myself photography and went and got an MFA in Boston at the Massachusetts College of Art. And at that time I decided, because I had spent 4 or 5 years pursuing my work or career advocating for art in Indonesia and playing gamelan, I decided it was time to kind of devote myself to my own art and the art of my own culture. So I went and did an MFA, and I started teaching photography at a pretty well-known art college in Western New York, the New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University. And when I was there, the school is pretty close to Ithaca, where Cornell University is. And Cornell, where I work now, is very well known in Southeast Asian studies. So after I had kind of established myself working as a photographer and an artist in my own right, I connected with the Southeast Asia program at Cornell, first by playing gamelan. And then I connected to some of the research facilities and other people involved with the Southeast Asia program at Cornell. Cornell has one of the largest Indonesian language collections in the world in their libraries, and one of the largest Southeast Asian library collections in the world.
Wow, that's really awesome.
I got really interested in exploring that. And it took me a long time strangely, like I was doing Indonesia and I was doing photography, and it took me a long time actually to put them together. When I was working with some of these researchers at Cornell, like I was trying to find something to do. Like I had a sabbatical coming up from a teaching position, and I wanted to do something in Indonesia. So I kind of looked at a lot of different research projects. I was interested in trying to write a book on a Balinese painter named Lempad, Igusti Nyoman Lempad, who was a very, very, very interesting artist. And like I tried that on and it didn't really work. And then it finally, after 15 years of playing gamelan and doing photography, it finally dawned on me that I could put them together. So in 2011, I got my first of 3 grants to do some work in Indonesia. My first grant was actually specifically to look at art education in Bali and Java, and to see if or how photography was a part of art education. And when I was there, I actually met I met a lot of photographers, particularly in Yogyakarta and Central Java, and particularly the MES 56 artists. I don't know if that came up in your exhibition or not. MES 56 is a very influential collective, artist collective in Java in Indonesia. And photography, like one of the things I learned at that time, photography didn't really enter art education in Indonesia till the mid-1990s. Around 1996, they graduated their first photography students. And the first photography students went on to form this collective, MES 56. So I used that first opportunity. It was a small grant. I was in Indonesia for about a month then to write some larger grants. And in 2014, I got a grant from the American Institute for Indonesian Studies and lived in Java for most of 2014. And I was teaching photography mostly in Yogyakarta and Bandung in West Java, a little bit in Jakarta. And at that point, I did a lot more research on photography, really broadly speaking. I met a lot of contemporary photographers, and both Yogyakarta and Bandung are very important cities in Indonesian art culture. So you have probably two best art academies, 2 of the 3 best art academies in Java, maybe 2 of the 4 best art academies in Java are in Yogyakarta and Bandung. You have ISI, Institut Seni Indonesia, Yogyakarta. Institut Seni Indonesia just means the State Art Academy of Indonesia, and the Institute of Technology in Bandung. So meeting a lot of photographers and professors there, I got an idea to put an exhibition together when I came back to the United States. When I came back, the American Institute for Indonesian Studies is connected to the Southeast Asia program at Cornell. And everybody was impressed with how much I accomplished when I was on my grant, that I was offered a 3-year faculty position, a research position with the Southeast Asia program at Cornell. When I put together an exhibition of contemporary photography from Java called Identity Crisis, Reflections on Public and Private Life in Contemporary Javanese Photography.
So this is the title of your exhibition, right?
It's the title of the exhibition. And we also did a book that was co-published by Cornell and After Hours Books in Jakarta. And that was my first project, my first big project on photography in Indonesia. To the best of my knowledge, it was the first exhibition in the United States devoted solely to photographers from Indonesia.
I don't think there are many even today.
No, I don't think so. It's still, I still think it's the only one. And it was the first time that some of the MES 56 artists in particular have exhibited in the United States since then, but that was the first time that any of them were here. I ended up connecting with the publisher After Hours in Jakarta. In 2014, 2015, I had this idea to write a book on the history of photography in Indonesia. Wu Ben, the person who wrote the history of Southeast Asian photography, published a chapter I wrote about the history for that book. He published it on his blog.
You mean that anthology, anthology?
No. So Wu Ben was keeping a website of writings about Southeast Asian photography, and he invited me to contribute something. And so I contributed an introduction that I wrote for a bigger history of photography from Indonesia. And the director of After Hours, Lons Bramontio, saw that introduction and said he wanted to publish the book.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided to do this book with Cornell and After Hours as a way for me to learn how to work with After Hours and to see how interested people would be in this type of book in Indonesia, in Java. And the book Identity Crisis, to the best of my knowledge, has been pretty successful in Indonesia. And since finishing that project, I have started another book with After Hours called A History of Photography in Indonesia, Essays on Photography from the Colonial Era to the Digital Age. And this is a book of essays.
Yeah.
I'm writing 5 of them, and then I have 12 contributors from around the world. So I have writers from Australia, Indonesia, Europe, and the United States contributing. I'm finishing that book right now. It will go into production and design next month.
Wow. So it will be published like this year, right?
Hopefully by the end of the year.
Yeah,
if not
that's
this
pretty
year,
cool.
early next year.
Yeah, I like to see it when it is published.
Yeah, me too. It's been a lot of hard work. But you know, the really funny thing is the reason I started writing about photography in Indonesia is, like, I still consider myself a photographer more than a writer. But I found it much easier to get grants to go do a writing project about Indonesia than it is to go make pictures in Indonesia. So while I was writing these 2 books, I also finished this book of my own pictures from Indonesia called Indonesian Landscapes. And this is also going to be published by After Hours later this year.
Well, I'll check it on their websites.
Yeah, it's not on the website yet, but I'll let you know.
Yeah, cool.
And recently I have connected with another photographer in England. He lives in Sheffield and teaches at Nottingham University. His name is Charles Fox. He used to be a photographer for UNICEF and the United Nations and did a lot of work in Cambodia. And since he started teaching, he has started his own publishing endeavor called Catfish Books. It's catfish.asia if you want to look it up. And they're just publishing photo books about Southeast Asian photography. So I'm currently working on 2 books with Catfish now. One will be kind of a small zine or self-published book that I did earlier, about a year ago, of pictures I made in Indonesia. And we're also trying to put together a book of interviews with photographers working in Southeast Asia.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
So we're hoping to get both of those out later this year or early next year.
So I think like there's one interesting point like in your like kind of like introduction that really like intrigues me. So you mentioned that it was not until 1996 that there was the first like student in photography, right? So I'm very interested in that kind of thing. So why is it so late for Indonesia to have its own like photography like school and the students?
Well, I think there are probably a lot of answers to that question. The 2 that seem most relevant to me are, one, kind of the legacy of colonialism. So Indonesia, as you probably know, was primarily colonized by the Dutch. So most of what we call Indonesia, Java, Sumatra, Bali, and the wealthier parts of Indonesia were all owned and governed by the Dutch. And the Dutch were actually the first European government to hire photographers to document their colonial enterprise. And I think if you look at any of the colonized nations, and I mean, I personally think a real study of the history of photography, you have to look at colonialism, because photography was weaponized to subjugate and disempower the colonies in South America, Asia, and Africa. So I think when Indonesia became an independent nation, their first president, Sukarno, was very anti-Western ideology. Like Hollywood films were illegal to show in Indonesia. And I think with that same line of thinking, I think photography is often dismissed as kind of a tool of colonialism. So I think Indonesians were very skeptical of it. Which isn't to say there wasn't a lot of photography. I mean, they still had photojournalists and whatnot. But within that realm, photography was considered kind of fool's work, like anybody can do it. You just push a button, you got a picture. So it didn't have much privilege, and I think it was frowned upon because of its impact during the colonial time. I also think economics have a lot to do with it. I mean, photography is a very expensive medium. And in the late 1990s or the early 1990s, it became a lot cheaper. Color photography came around. You had 1 hour photo development labs all over the world. And then certainly digital photography has made it that much more affordable. So I think those are from my perspective, those are the two primary motivations for kind of like or contributing factors to why it took so long for photography to develop as a serious critical or creative practice.
Yeah, that's
in
good
Indonesia.
Yeah.
What I find really interesting today, though, is how incredibly quickly photography has caught on. So I mentioned that I got several different grants to do my work in Indonesia. So I have taught photography in Java in both 2014 and 2016. And I have been so impressed with how eager the students are and just how quickly the medium is growing there.
Wow.
It's pretty exciting to be a part of.
Yeah, that's good to know, because like I haven't thought about like today, like what does today looks like in Indonesia? Because like even in China, like they're like parents want a lot, like many students to study like studio arts or like photography, because like they don't think like these majors are necessary. So I'm very surprised to hear that in Indonesia people are eager to learn photography. Yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
No, I wasn't.
Okay. Yeah.
I wasn't going to add too much to that. I actually did teach photography in Beijing for 3 weeks in
which year?
2004.
Oh.
I taught photography at the Beijing Film Academy. But short of that, I had very limited experience with China.
Yeah, I think like a lot of my friends, they want to learn photography, but like they see photography as a kind of like interest and not as their like career. So I think like, yeah.
You know, I found, I haven't experienced this so much in my recent experiences in Indonesia, but I have found that teaching photography in the United States, I find it increasingly more difficult to teach photography.
Why do you say so?
Well, I mean, in some ways it's easier to learn than ever. It seems strange that I find it harder to teach. But I feel that the students' attention to the fine details of photography or kind of critical understandings or tradition of photography is just not as strong as it used to be. And I think some of that is because they've grown up with a camera in their hand and they can disseminate their pictures internationally, infinitely with social media and whatnot.
Right. Sometimes like it seems to me like it's so easy to take a photo nowadays. You can just like use your iPhone, you can use whatever you have, like even iPads, like you can just like click the button and like there's like so many apps or softwares that you can use to just like edit those photos. They can become pretty and just like post it. So I think like,
you know,
the way like how people see photography is changing like very rapidly.
Absolutely, but and I think there's a sort of photographic literacy or understanding on a much broader level than there ever has been. I mean, there are more photographs made than there were during the entire 19th century, right? And yet at the same time, I also think photographic education should start much earlier. I mean, kids get phones when they're 10 or 11, if not younger. And I think because of that, a lot of people have forgotten how powerful photography can be. And I think we need to be reminded to think critically about the things that we're looking at.
Yeah, especially I think like during difficult times, there are so many events like happening in the world right now, and pictures have power, a kind of power that I think sometimes are stronger than words, especially like for people who do not have time to read, like pictures have an instant like effect on them. Yeah.
Right.
So what is your current focus of your research projects?
Well, as I mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on this book with
Mm-hmm.
Catfish Books, like the book of interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, quite truthfully, short of that, my work is a little bit less centered on Indonesia than it has
Mm-hmm.
been in recent years. I mean, I consider myself a photographer, like a studio artist, more than I
Mm-hmm.
do a researcher or a writer. I mean, I've written 2 books on photography now, and I have a 3rd coming out. Um, but I'm really kind of actively making pictures here in the United States, which I haven't
Mm-hmm.
done in quite a while. So I've been focusing on that a lot. I'm always reading about Indonesia, and I'm always talking online with people from Indonesia and whatnot. But I mean, my current focus is really just to take these big projects I've been
Mm-hmm.
working on for a few years, these 2 books, and getting them out, and then starting these new things with Catfish Books.
Yeah, okay. So I'm wondering, like, based on your previous research, what are some like interesting features of Indonesia, like photographers, like compared to other like Southeastern Asian photographers, maybe like Thailand, like or Burma?
Yeah, I don't know if I can say too much about Indonesia in relation to these other countries,
Mm-hmm.
because I haven't been anywhere in Southeast Asia other than Indonesia, unless you consider Korea Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I read Wubon's book, but it's been a while, or I'm sorry, Wuben's book, but it's been a while. And like, even that's a little bit different um, than actually being there and meeting with the
Mm-hmm.
artists and things like that. What impressed me the most about the first photographers that I met in Indonesia, so specifically the MES 56 artists, and if you don't know them, I would encourage you to look up their work. They've been very
Yeah.
influential. They've exhibited
Mm-hmm.
around the world, etc.
How do you spell their name? Like
It's
Met
just MES
MES.
56.
Okay, MES 56. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, they were at the Foam Museum in Amsterdam
Mm-hmm.
recently. It's one of the biggest and best photo
Mm-hmm.
institutions in the world. Um, so what impressed me about them the first time I met them is like there was no um, concern about what photographs are supposed to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the way that I understand kind of the history of photography in Indonesia, at least a more modern or contemporary photography in relation to fine arts, like what, I don't know if or how this would relate to China, but in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
like photography and film and performance art and installation, like all of those things are connected and are a part of the history of photography. But photography has a history and presence as a fine art completely independent of those other mediums. And the
Mm-hmm.
way that photography entered the fine arts in Java was more because people were making photographs of installations and performances. And then people started looking at those photographs, and slowly people accepted the idea that it didn't need to be a performance or an installation, it could be the photograph. And some of those first like artist photographers to really catch hold in Indonesia, specifically the MES 56 photographers, really, like when you look at their work, you can see that they're growing out of other artistic vocabularies. And I really admired and respected that they had no interest or care as to what photographs are supposed to be, and that they could mix all of these other artistic languages within them. And some of the early works they did, I think, are remarkably innovative and remarkably expressive.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's changed a bit. I think you're having more what I would call like photographers, people who are really interested in the medium of photography and are really looking at the traditions and trying to make pictures that look like Ansel Adams or whatever. But what initially struck me was a kind of freedom, just because there was nothing that came before them.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like as a visual photographic art, they got to make the rules themselves. I sometimes wish I had that kind of freedom, you know, like I was taught to make photographs that looked a certain way. I was taught what good photography looked like.
Mm-hmm. Do you think like Indonesian photographers or artists in general are more active like in recent years?
What do you mean active?
Maybe like they have more exhibitions like internationally, like
Oh,
yeah.
you know, there in the 1980s, I think like 89 or 86 or something, there's a really big exhibition um, put together by two European curators called A City on the Move,
Mm-hmm.
which was looking at kind of like the hyper cities and the really kind of densely populated areas of Asia, like Kuala Lumpur and Manila and Shanghai and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And kind of looking at this kind of pan-Asian aesthetic um, and kind of like what that was showing us about the late 20th century and moving into the 21st century. And I think that exhibition did a lot for opening the world to contemporary Asian art. And I think a lot of the first generation of like really well-known contemporary Indonesian artists benefited from that, like Harry Dono and Agus Suwage and painters like that. I mean, it's difficult to say, like, and I think short of that, like, I think my answer is it's a little bit different depending on where you are in the world. In Korea and Japan and Australia, there's probably a lot more interest in Indonesian art than there is in the United States. Like Indonesia is, I would reckon 50%, if not more, of Americans couldn't find Indonesia on a map. You know, it's not really part of our popular discussion. You know, like Americans learn about politics in China and Europe and Mexico, but not Indonesia, not anywhere in Southeast Asia. But yeah, I mean, I'm kind of thinking out loud and giving you several different answers at once. So, I mean, in the United States, no, there's not a lot of Indonesian art, but I know globally there is. And, you know, the big exhibition in Germany, the Documenta exhibition.
Oh, yeah, I know
in
that.
2022, it's being curated by a group of Indonesian artists. They're the very first Asian curators of that exhibition. And certainly technology and social media has opened doors for a lot of people. The artists that I know in Indonesia, they show a little bit in Europe and around Asia and Southeast Asia. Australia, Korea, Singapore would be the big places. The MES 56 artists some of them have shown in Europe and the United States and probably China and Japan.
Yeah, I think like Chinese people are starting to know like Indonesian arts, especially like after, I mean, I think like last year, like in Thailand, there was a like biennial, like, or yeah. So I think like because of those like exhibitions, like people are getting to know more and more like Indonesian arts and like Southeast Asian art in general. And also like for our bookstore, like because of the show, like we also like knew a lot more like books made by Indonesian artists. So it's always a good way like to know what's happening in Indonesia in the artistic scene. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, like as an American who's interested in Indonesia, it baffles me that more people don't know about Indonesia. And I have a friend at the consulate in New York City who's from Kalimantan, who likes to identify Indonesia as the biggest country nobody knows anything about. But I mean, Indonesia is one of the biggest countries in the world. It's the third largest democracy in the world, and it's the single largest Muslim population. Like there's so much complexity and interest that should be there. And part of what has attracted me to it is, I mean, I think kind of the historical and traditional arts like gamelan and batik are superlative. But I mean, I think what is going on kind of like post-colonialism and post-Suharto and the dictatorship, like I think there's just a remarkably unique vision and understanding of politics and life emerging in that part of the world.
Yeah, I think there's
the Asia Society in New York did a really amazing exhibition a couple of years ago called After Darkness that was looking at all of the countries in Southeast Asia that had major episodes of violence in the second half of the 20th century. So I think specifically there's like Vietnam and Laos from the war with the Americans, and Indonesia from the massacres of 1965.
Yeah,
so it's a really an interesting kind of look at the region. And I know when I was in Java in 2016 on my third grant to work on these projects, there was a big exhibition traveling around Southeast Asia of kind of contemporary works. And this wasn't going to big institutions. It was going to MES 56 and the Cemeti Art House, which are important places in Indonesian contemporary art, but it's not the National Gallery or the National Museum or anything like that. And a year ago was the Big Joke Jakarta Biennial, which again was kind of the pan-Southeast Asian exhibition. And there was an attempt to look at commonalities of Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I think there are more and more like books, exhibitions, discussions about those like countries. And it's a very good thing to like have all those like materials devoted to this area. I just read like James Scott's like the art of like non-governance. Yeah, I forgot the name of that book, but it's a really good read. So could you recommend some of your favorite photographers in Indonesia?
In Indonesia? Today or in general?
In general, just pick several of your favorite.
Well, actually, one of my favorite photographers, I pulled some of my favorite books from Indonesia, and hopefully I would have the chance to show them to you.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite photographers is in Bandung. I can show you some of his pictures here. I don't know how well these will view. This is the book I did with After Hours in Cornell. His name is Henritus Napit Sunargo. This is a series he did just of family photographs called After Image. He did a really great series of photographs in Chinatown and Bandung. Chinese Indonesians have a very precarious and difficult position in Indonesian culture. He's been doing some wet plate photographs recently that kind of look at the history of Indonesia and colonialism. So I like his work a great deal. I think some of the most important photographers in Indonesia were the Indonesian Press Photographic Services. So IFOS was founded or created during the revolution against the Dutch, the guerrilla uprising against the Dutch after World War II. Their photographs are the only photographs, known photographs made in Indonesia or by Indonesians that survived the Dutch war. And many of them are like buried and things like that. So these were made like in the 1940s.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it really shows kind of the insurgency against the Dutch and the rise of Sukarno. This is an amazing book. It's in Bahasa Indonesia, so it's not written in English, and I think it's only written in Indonesian. It's called IFOS Remastered, so I love this work. I love Rami Purbawa's work.
Yeah, our readers
also. Destiny is amazing.
We got that book.
I don't know if you used the After Hours book, or this book was originally published by the Gallery Photojournalism in Antara.
We used the After Hours book.
Yeah, I've never seen the original publication of it, but I love the After Hours copy. So that's one of my favorite ones. More historically, this is another one of my favorite books. I don't know, it's probably many photographers. It's called The Importance of Java Seen from the Air. And it was made in 1928 by the Dutch military.
So it is an antique book.
Yeah, it's almost 100 years old. So they're all just like these aerial photographs of agricultural and maritime industries in Java. And it's this incredibly beautifully designed book. And like one other book that I really love that I pulled is Walter Spee's Dance and Drama in Bali. Walter Spees was a painter and musician who lived in Bali between the world wars. And he worked with a writer from Europe named Beryl de Zoet to put together this kind of encyclopedic study of Balinese performance art, theater, and dance.
Wow.
I don't know how well you can see it.
Yeah, I can see it.
But as a painter and a musician, he had a great visual intelligence, and he was really highly regarded in Bali by both Europeans and Balinese for his understanding of Balinese performance.
So it's
this is a
basically
really
about
great
like
book.
dancing and like other performances.
Yeah, dance and theater.
Okay.
Some of my, like, I really like, my favorite of the MES 56 artists is this man named Wimo Ambalabayang. He's one of the founders. And his work is really funny and really smart. I can show you a couple of his pictures in my book.
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with this like group, but I'll do some research about them because like it sounds really interesting. Wow.
So this is Wimo Ambalabayang's work. This is from a series called High Hopes, which I think plays on a lot of Indonesian historical traditions of mass dance and Islam and things like that.
Wow.
A photographer in Bandung I like a great deal. Or actually another one of the MES 56 artists I like a lot. He just put together an exhibition in New York City. Is Dito Bono. This is a series of self-portraits he did using x-rays he had before surgeries. But most of his work is more kind of based on community interaction. So he's a really interesting, really sensitive person. Arum Dayaputri. I don't know how you can see these.
Yeah.
She did this when she was really young. This was, she did a graduate degree in photojournalism in Manila. As part of her thesis project, she photographed dangdut, which is a form of Indonesian popular music that's really really popular in West Java.
Is it a
really
festival or?
I think they'll just put stages up anywhere, like, in cities or rurally. Perhaps one of the most famous of the MES artists is Angki Purbandono. He's most well known for these pictures he does without a camera.
Without a camera?
Yeah, he just uses a scanner. He calls it scanography. He makes these three-dimensional collages that he scans.
Well, that's very interesting to know.
Yeah. My favorite work of his, which we showed at Cornell and was also shown at the Asia Society in New York, are these photographs of homeless people in Yogyakarta called Beyond Versace. So he's a really, I like him as much as I like his pictures. He's a really sweet and kind person. So those are some of my favorite books and some of my favorite photographers, I think.
Wow, thanks for sharing. Yeah, I'm especially interested in your own book because I think it's a very good like introductory book to like Indonesian artists, as like so many of us are very ignorant of the place there. But it's really good to know. Like,
I'm pleased with how the book came out. So the book is divided into 3 sections. I wrote a big introduction, which is kind of about my own research, both the work that I did on the Cornell campus, kind of historically, as well as the field work I did in 2014. And then we have kind of the portfolios of all the artists that were in the exhibition. And then the afterword is written by a good friend of mine who's a curator in Bandung, West Java, and he teaches at the Institute of Technology in Bandung, where he actually wrote about the first mentions of fine art photography written in Indonesian from the 1940s. And he, like, there's very little discussion about it, but he was pointing out, like, it's not that the discussion is new, it's just that people never really bought into it. So I like the way that that kind of ends the book. That's a good essay.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all these like wonderful books with me.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Yeah, I think like I've asked like all of my questions, which I write in the email.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think like my colleague and I will later edit this video and maybe we will share it with our readers. Is that okay?
Of course. Yeah, if you want to put it on YouTube or anything, that's fine too.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah, I think we will upload it to YouTube. Yeah.
Just let me know when you do.
Yeah, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Okay, I think like yeah, I think I'll just like finish this meeting.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Have a good day.
You too. Good night.
Bye. Good morning. Bye-bye.